Sorry, starting the recording like messes up the screen. But hello, my name is Gabriela Macias. I am a psychology major under Professor Wei Zhang's Cognitive Neuroscience Lab in the Department of Psychology, and I am going to be giving a talk on called Getting a Grip on Implicit Racial Bias. So we're going to talk about implicit racial bias and its relation to cognitive psychology. So first, I'd like to acknowledge the Office of Undergraduate Education and Student Engagement here at UCR. My experiment 3 of the study was partially funded by their Undergraduate Research Mini Grant Award, and their Chancellor's Research Fellowship has allowed me to present here today. I'd also like to thank Dr. Wei Zhang and his lab for guiding me in these experiments for 3 years and for encouraging me to apply for the CR. So first, I want to start by getting us to think about the topic that we're going to be discussing today. So I would like you to think of a time you made a split-second assumption about something. Was it good? Was it bad? Did you feel guilty for maybe thinking it in the first place? Can you think about what factors led you to think that? What was it about the person that made you think that? It's these sort of split-second assumptions and split-second decisions based on maybe someone's appearance, maybe their race, that we're going to be discussing today when we discuss implicit racial bias. So that's what I want to discuss before we get into the bulk of the experiment, what we mean by implicit racial bias. Having implicit racial bias doesn't mean that you're racist. Actually, it's completely the opposite. It's based off of our society and things that have happened in history that have led us to make these implicit associations about a certain race of people, about different races of people. So someone can be explicitly against racism, but still have implicit racial bias. And this is because of everything that has happened in our history and in our society, what we've been conditioned to think about certain people. So that's why implicit racial bias is different than racism. So when we're doing the study and we're saying that people are showing that they have implicit bias, we don't mean that they're racist. We're meaning that this implicit bias is present in all of us, and that's why we want to learn how to overcome it. Because implicit racial bias affects everyone minority populations who are affected by it. It's seen when the law is enforced. It's seen even when someone is trying to get a job and maybe they're judged based off of their hairstyle or the color of their skin. Implicit racial bias is going to affect people because these implicit associations that are made about them can negatively affect them. So now we're going to get into the introduction of how we're going to do this study, or how we did the study. So overcoming implicit racial bias, we determined, would be factored by physical effort, because we found evidence from different studies by Gabriela and Baumeister that physical effort during visual working memory tasks actually led to better performance on cognitive tasks. So the concept of cognitive psychology that we're going to be discussing here have to do with self-control and cognitive control. Because implicit racial bias is instantaneous, the only way that we can diminish that implicit bias is to enhance our self-control. And we found evidence that physical effort can actually enhance our self-control and our cognitive control in these tasks. Also, we found that high levels of physical activity or intense physical activity led to better decision-making on instantaneous or implicit decisions on a study by Hung and LaRue. So these studies have shown that there's this mind-body interaction between physical effort and our mental effort. We are determining that implicit bias can actually be reduced by these physical activities. Also, to assess implicit racial bias, we're going to use what we call an implicit association test, which is a useful tool used to assess implicit racial bias. So the way the IAT works is that it's a speed of response task that measures the degree to which two racial groups are automatically associated with positive and negative evaluations. So it's a highly renowned task. Its internal and external validity has been proved through various studies. So basically the way that it works is that you're going to see faster and more accurate responses when you see a task in which you're responding to different faces and different words on a screen, and the white faces are paired with good words and the black faces are paired with bad words, because that's what we've been conditioned to think. We kind of have these implicit associations that we're going to see white or European people in a more positive light than we are going to see Black and ethnic racial minorities in a more negative light. So you're going to see faster and more accurate responses for those conditions versus when the responses switch and you're now told to respond to white faces and bad words with the same button. So the IAT uses reaction time to assess the strengths of these associations. So that is what we are going to be using in our study today. That leads us to our working hypothesis that we created. Since we know that effortful physical action leads to interacting with cognitive control processes, we're going to say that increased effort, which is going to be manifested as a hand grip task or a hand grip performance, is going to be needed to overcome this implicit racial bias in our IAT task. Therefore, we should see more accurate and higher hand grip force during incongruent trials, and we should see that in trials in which the hand grip is more strenuous or higher, they should show a lower reaction time to the trials than if you aren't exerting as much physical effort. And if this weren't true, we would see no difference between the groups. So now that leads us into our methodology and how we actually put the study together. So our participants were gathered from UCR Psychology's SONA system. It consists of college-aged individuals recruited to do experiments to get course credit for their introductory psychology courses. We asked participants during the study to respond as fast as possible to every stimuli with the gamepad, which you'll see in the bottom right, while simultaneously holding the hand dynamometer, which is shown in the top right. So these are the tools that we're using. The hand dynamometer is going to measure your hand grip, and how hard you are squeezing that hand grip is going to show how much physical force you are exerting during the task. So now this brings us into our actual experiment. The first thing we do when we bring participants into the room is that we tell them we're going to measure their maximal voluntary force, which is a measure of their hand strength. We measure this 3 times by having them squeeze as hard as they can, and we use the average. That's going to be the force that they have or use. We're going to base the experiment on for the rest of the experiment. Basically what this does is it standardizes hand strength, because what we don't want to do is have the same number of MVC for participants across participants, because if someone with a 185 MVC, let's say we tell them, okay, maintain at 70 MVC, that's going to be a lot lower for them than someone who has a 90 MVC. So this way we're using the same percentage of MVC relative to a person's own physical capacity. So this way it just standardizes the MVC, and we don't have to worry about that being a third or confounding variable. Next comes our actual 7 IAT trials, 4 of which are going to have the IAT trials with concurrent hand grip tasks. Blocks 1 and 2 are going to be practice tasks in which we introduce the stimuli to them. Block 1 deals with faces, block 2 deals with words. This is a gamepad only trial in which we tell them respond to white faces with the top button and respond to black faces with the bottom button. And in the word trial, they respond to 20 words in which we tell them respond to positive words with the top button and negative words with the bottom button. This just gets them associated with the stimuli that they're going to be dealing with for the rest of the trial. We also have them do some practice MVC trials in which they are just practicing holding the hand grip at different levels, because it is a little bit hard to use. It's not the most comfortable thing in the world, and so we want to just get them associated with what it's like to maintain certain percentages of their hand strength. Blocks 3 and 4 are going to be our actual experimental trials, in which they are given a certain percentage of hand strength to maintain, which will be either 5%, which will be our low force experimental trials, and then 45%, which is going to be our high force experimental trials. That will then be followed by 5 trial sequences of either faces or words. It's randomized, so they're either going to get faces or words, and they're told to respond as quickly as possible while maintaining the indicated hand grip at either 45% or 5%, and respond as quickly as they can with the gamepad. The first 2 trials, so blocks 3 and 4, is going to consist of 60 trials in which white faces and good words are associated with the top button, and black faces and bad words are associated with the bottom. So they're going to respond as quickly as they can to these trials before we give them another practice block, in which we say, okay, you're going to do the same thing, but you're only going to see faces. This is a gamepad only block, and they're told respond to black faces with the top button and white faces with the bottom button now. So the associations now switch. We then tell them to respond as quickly as possible and go into blocks 6 and 7, in which you're also doing a concurrent hand grip task. But this time they're responding to black faces with the top button and positive words with the top button, and white faces with the bottom button and negative words with the bottom button. So the association is switched in the second task, which goes against the traditional IAT results that we should be seeing. So blocks 3 and 4 are the traditional IAT phenomena, in which we are going to see the traditional implicit bias that we usually see replicated in real life, versus blocks 6 and 7 are going to go against that and be the black good, white bad trials. We did 3 experiments of this. So the first one that I just explained was like the main format that we used for both experiment or all 3 experiments. Experiment 2 was the same thing as the one I just explained, except we added an endurance task in which participants were instructed to hold 70% of their MVC for as long as possible, just to test if endurance during this task had any association with IAT. Experiment 3 was going to be the same, except this time we switched the stimulus response mapping, which means the black good, white bad condition now preceded the other condition. We wanted to do this because we want to eliminate order effects. We want to make sure that we're seeing the implicit racial bias, not because it's what they were told to do first, but because it's actually they're the implicit association they're going to make. So we want to make sure that we're not doing this, we're not seeing this effect because of the order that they're seeing it in. We want to make sure that it actually exists because of the implicit racial bias. We then eliminated the 70% MVC task because we didn't need to, after we found that the results for that weren't significant, we decided to just eliminate it. We also added a self-report measure on a person's views and their motivation to change their views because we decided we wanted to assess if motivation was also a factor in this. If one is motivated to change their views or to change and try to stop this implicit bias, will they respond better? We also added a remote associates task, which just assessed creativity. So our results showed that IAT reaction time and IAT accuracy were significantly slower for the white bad, black good condition. We also saw that it was faster for the white good, black bad condition. Another key result is the difference in IAT reaction time and the difference in IAT reaction time again for grip endurance and MVC. We found that grip endurance is not significantly correlated with differences in reaction time, so how long you maintain the grip isn't going to correlate with how good you do. We also found that overall measure of MVC isn't correlated with performing better or worse on our IAT task. So how strong you are isn't going to determine how well you do. Our biggest result that we found is a strong negative correlation between the difference in IAT and the difference in grip force. So what we found is that the bigger difference there is in how hard you're squeezing between the low force and the high force, the better your IAT results are going to be. So the IAT effect remains regardless of order, but the harder that you try, the better that you're actually going to be able to do. Squeezing harder would lead to lower reaction times. And that is the biggest conclusion that we found from this. So our working hypothesis was not falsified. We actually found evidence to support it. So some takeaways from this. Overcoming implicit racial biases is effortful. We found that performance on IAT and Iat Trials can be improved and that higher physical loads led to better reaction times. We also wanted to do better by getting people to improve their performance on the 45% MVC trials so that they can do better. They were less accurate on the 45% MVC trials because it's actually hard to maintain and it led to more fatigue. We also didn't get to finalize the self-report measures, so we wanted to address motivation later and get more participants so that we could actually assess that as a factor in the study. And then just some future takeaways that we can do this with other racial biases. We can understand the neuromechanisms that are actually behind the study. And that one of the most important ones is that we can actually exercise our self-control. There is this body-mind interaction that can lead you to improve your self-control, which could then in the future eliminate these racial biases. So I thank you for coming to my talk today, and please drop any questions that you have in the chat. I'm going to be more than happy to answer.